Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we try to cut through all the noise, look at the sources, and really give you the essential stuff you need to know. Today, we're doing a deep dive into, well, probably the single most expensive mistake that retail traders make pretty much everywhere. And it's not really about, picking a bad stock or something like that. It's about this universal, really critical financial error. Honestly, it's probably cost individual investors way more money than bad strategies or not enough research or even like the worst stock tips you could possibly get.
That's absolutely right. Our mission today is pretty focused. We're trying to decode that main emotional pitfall, the one that turns, otherwise smart people into gamblers who just keep adding to their risk. We're going beyond just looking at strategies today. We're really diving into behavioral finance. The goal is to give you a clear, genuinely actionable way to overcome this specific issue. It's kind of a silent portfolio killer.
Yeah. And here's the thing that's always struck me as weird, the paradox, right? Strategies are everywhere. You can spend like an afternoon online, watch a few videos, read a few threads, and walk away with 10 different complex trading systems. But still, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of individual trading accounts just fail. I mean, the market's never been more transparent, access has never been easier, but the failure rate just stays stubbornly high. Why is that?
It's because the real problem isn't knowledge. It's usually not about, what charting software you use or which indicator you're following. The failure almost always comes down to a deep lack of self-control. It's about emotional discipline, especially when the market turns against your idea. And today we're looking right at what that specific emotional failure actually is.
Okay, so let's define it clearly. The biggest emotional mistake we're talking about is the refusal to just accept and cut a small loss. Specifically, it's things like averaging down into losing positions or just holding on to losing trades forever, basically, just hoping they'll recover.
And the thing that makes it so dangerous, so insidious, as you said, is that the moment you decide to hold on to that loser, your brain starts telling you the story. It tells you you're being prudent, like you're being resilient, just waiting for the turnaround that's bound to happen. Or maybe you're just trying to get back to even. But what's really happening is you're compounding your risk, you're burning through valuable capital, and you're basically committing financial suicide through inaction, inertia, really.
It's like the ultimate failure in actually executing the trade based on emotion, not logic. It's the difference, isn't it, between acting like a professional risk manager and just being an emotional bystander watching your money disappear. We really need to show you exactly why that urge, that almost irresistible urge to hold a losing position, is sort of biologically wired in us, and how it works directly against protecting your capital, and most importantly, how you can start building a psychological defense like right away.
Okay, let's kick off with what I think is the central truth here. The thing that really separates professional traders from most retail folks. Most accounts get wiped out not because the strategy itself was bad, but because the trader just couldn't stick to the plan they made. They can't control their impulses when things get choppy, when volatility spikes.
Yeah, it's that classic gap between knowing what to do
Hmm.
and actually doing it. And we have to acknowledge the information flow now is incredible. You can find really sophisticated strategies shared completely freely everywhere: Reddit, trading groups, you name it. The blueprints for potential success are, well, they're out there. But the reason people blow up their accounts, it nearly always comes down to emotional fragility when they see red on the screen.
And this emotional failure, it shows up most clearly in that refusal to accept a loss. That's the universal trap. It doesn't matter what country you're in, what asset you're trading, or even how much experience you have. It gets everyone.
And if you're listening to this, I bet you've had this exact internal conversation. Almost certainly. It's that little voice, right? When the stock drops maybe 5% below where you bought it, it whispers, just hang on one more day. Surely the market will bounce tomorrow. I can at least get back to break even.
That inner voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seductive promise that you can just delay the pain. That's the death knell for so many trading accounts. It gives you this false, immediate sense of feeling okay, feeling secure, while you're just passively watching what should be a managed risk turn into an unmanaged disaster. By putting off the decision, you're giving up the single most valuable thing a trader has, which is optionality, the ability to act.
That's a really critical point. By holding on to that losing position, you're tying up capital. Capital that could be used for a new trade, maybe one with a much higher probability of success. But instead of putting that money to work, it's just stuck in this black hole, waiting for some speculative, hope fueled bounce that might never come.
Precisely. And let's talk about the immediate damage this does. It's about turning a small cut into a massive wound. Think of a paper cut loss, maybe, I don't know, 2% or 3%. That's just the cost of doing business in the market. It's like paying tuition. But the emotional delay, that refusal to just click the sell button, it allows that little paper cut to fester. And it grows and grows into this huge, devastating financial wound that genuinely threatens your ability to keep trading long term.
And it all starts from this really flawed justification process in our heads. Traders convince themselves of something that sounds logical but is actually financially destructive. They think, okay, if I sell now, I make the loss real, it's booked. But if I wait, maybe, just maybe it'll recover and I can at least break even. That thought process basically justifies swapping out objective strategy for pure hope. It turns a necessary risk management step into an emotional gamble.
And crucially, they're trading against the plan they probably already made. They had a reason to get in, right? And implicitly, or maybe explicitly, they had a reason to get out if things went wrong. But the second that pain of the loss hits, the rational part of the brain just steps aside. Emotion takes over.
And what's really wild about this whole thing is that the actual fix, the technical solution, it's remarkably simple. We're not talking about needing some complex secret algorithm or, expensive data feeds.
No, the simple solution that gets missed is just having a pre-decided mechanical stop loss, one that you execute without any exceptions. If you figure out the exact point where your trade idea is proven wrong, the invalidation point before you even enter the trade, and then you actually execute that exit when the price hits that level, the entire emotional mistake is basically prevented right there. It's like building a firewall against all those psychological traps we're about to get into.
Right. So the technical part's easy.
Yeah.
Knowing where to put the stop, but actually following through. That's the battlefield. Okay, let's get into the deep psychology now. Because really understanding the why behind this is the first step to building some kind of defense. And this isn't about being smart or dumb, it's more like a biological predisposition. We really have to introduce the main culprit here: loss aversion bias.
Loss aversion bias. Yeah, that's arguably the single most powerful psychological force working against a rational trader. Study after study has shown this, the pain we feel from losing a certain amount of money. It's roughly twice as intense psychologically as the pleasure or joy we feel from gaining the exact same amount.
Twice as intense. That 2-to-1 ratio, that's just staggering when you think about it.
Yeah.
So losing $1,000 just feels way, way worse in our brains than gaining $1,000 feels good, which totally explains that disproportionate emotional gut punch when you hit a stop loss. It feels like a real, almost physical threat.
And it is perceived as a genuine threat, at least by the older, more primitive parts of our brain. This isn't just, poor discipline or weakness. This is literally our brain wiring working against the mechanics of modern trading, which is all about probabilities. Our evolutionary psychology is geared towards protecting scarce resources, avoiding loss at all costs. So the immediate perceived pain of selling at a loss triggers this really deep protective instinct.
So the brain is basically trying to save you from feeling that pain.
Exactly. It tells the trader, "Whoa, don't book that loss. That feels awful. Just wait. Hang on. Maybe it'll turn around and you can avoid this whole painful experience."
Hmm.
And this protective impulse, it gets immediately reinforced by other cognitive biases that jump in to help rationalize sticking with the bad
Oh,
decision.
really? Like what other biases kind of team up to help make this irrational decision feel rational?
Well, two big ones immediately come to mind: anchoring bias and confirmation bias. Anchoring bias means the trader gets mentally stuck or anchored to their original purchase price. They just refuse to sell below that anchor point, even if the whole reason they bought the stock, the fundamentals or the technicals, has completely fallen apart. They start viewing the current price only in relation to their entry point, not in relation to where the market actually thinks the stock is heading next.
Right. So if I bought a stock at, say, $100 and now it's trading at $90, my brain isn't processing that the market currently values it at $90. Instead, it's just screaming, "You're losing $10 a share. You have to get back to $100." It clings desperately to that original price.
Precisely. And then confirmation bias jumps into the game. The trader is now emotionally invested in this stock, right?
Mm.
So they stop objectively looking at new information. They start tracking every single news headline, every market rumor, every analyst comment, but they're only looking for stuff that confirms their existing belief, their hope, the belief that the stock is just about to turn around. They subconsciously or even consciously filter out all the negative news or data points.
So they're not looking for the truth of the market anymore. They're just hunting for validation for their decision to hold. And this whole process brings us back to that crucial point you made earlier. The brain's main goal in this mess of biases isn't protecting the trader's capital. It's protecting the trader's ego,
Absolutely. Taking the loss means admitting you were wrong, admitting the trade idea didn't work out. It's an admission of error, right? It's a dent to your self image as a skilled trader, and the ego fights incredibly hard to avoid that feeling. So the moment the trader decides, okay, I'm holding, they get this little hit of temporary psychological relief. They've avoided the immediate sting of booking the loss.
that temporary relief, that moment of feeling slightly better because you didn't click sell. That's got to be one of the most expensive psychological coping mechanisms in finance, hasn't it? It comes at the direct cost of potentially catastrophic, much larger losses down the road.
And this whole dynamic is just massively amplified by the world we live in now. We have to bring in the social pressure factor. I mean,
Mhm.
we live in a world completely saturated with people posting their results, especially on social media.
Oh, yeah. You scroll through Twitter, Instagram, wherever,
Hmm.
and you only see the massive profit screenshots, right? The huge winners, the bragging. You rarely see people posting their losses,
Exactly. And this creates this intense underlying pressure to perform, but also crucially, pressure to not lose face, not appear to be wrong in public or even to yourself. You don't want to be the one who, messed up or didn't follow their plan. This fear of judgment, both from others and internally, it just fuels that attachment to a losing position. It makes cutting those losses exponentially harder. It creates this huge gap between your private reality sitting on a big loss and the performance anxiety driven by what you see others posting.
which leads, I guess, to the final stage of just getting psychologically tangled up in this
Oh,
thing,
God.
emotional attachment and obsession. Once a trader really commits to holding those losers, the position basically becomes an emotional hostage situation.
They become completely obsessed. You see it all the time. They spend hours just watching that one specific stock tick by tick. Their entire focus shifts away from objective risk management, from finding new opportunities, and it becomes all about seeking internal validation for holding on, just hoping for a rescue. And the opportunity cost of that obsession, just the time, the mental energy, the stress wasted on nursing a failing trade that cost is almost as high as the actual capital being lost. It's draining.
Okay, let's try and tie all this high level psychology back down to the real world, to the tangible, quantifiable impact this has on your actual portfolio. We really need to internalize that core message, the one that separates traders who survive from those who don't. Small losses are tuition fees, big losses are account killers.
That really is the essential lesson for sticking around in the markets long enough to succeed. Longevity is key. Small losses, the ones you planned for and managed, they teach you something, maybe about market structure, maybe about your entry timing, but they don't stop you from trading the next day. Big emotional losses, though, the ones that spiral out of control, they often take you right out of the game completely. They can force you back to the drawing board, maybe even force you to stop trading altogether because the drawdown is just too psychologically or financially painful.
And the math behind holding a loser, especially averaging down, it just makes it such a treacherous path. Traders often do it, right?
Yeah.
Add more money to lower their average cost. It feels logical on the surface. I'm buying it cheaper now,
Yeah.
but it massively increases the percentage gain required just to get back to even.
Yeah, we should probably look at the numbers here because they're pretty brutal. Let's say you take a 10% loss on a position. Okay, you need an 11.1% gain from that lower point just to get back to where you started. It's doable. But what if you hold on, maybe you even average down, and the loss grows to 20% of your allocated capital for that trade? Now, suddenly, you need a 25% gain just to break even.
And that curve just gets steeper and steeper the deeper you fall. It's not linear. If you let that loss compound down to, say, 40%, now you need a whopping 66% gain just to recover your initial capital. And if you hit a 50% loss, you need a 100% gain. The stock literally has to double from that point just for you to get back to square one. So averaging down doesn't actually make the position safer. It dramatically increases the future return you need just to claw your way back to zero.
It's the classic image, isn't it? Digging yourself into a deeper hole and then being surprised that the ladder you need to climb out has to be so much longer.
And, to make this really concrete for everyone listening, maybe I should share this specific story that really hammered this lesson home for me. Because I think this mistake is almost always learned the hard way through pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Walk us through it. What was the anatomy of that breakdown, both psychologically and financially? Where did the first mistake really happen?
Okay, well, it started with what I thought was a perfectly reasonable trade setup. I got into a stock, but then the market turned pretty quickly against me. The position fell about 8%. Now, here's the first mistake. My actual planned stop loss was set at 5%.
Yeah.
So I was already violating my own rule. But I was anchored, right? Anchored to my entry price. I didn't want to book that 8% loss.
Right. So you're already in ego protection mode, refusing to admit the initial idea might have been wrong, or at least the timing was off.
Exactly. So instead of cutting the loss like I should have, I started telling myself that story. Oh, this must just be temporary volatility. It's oversold now. I actually convinced myself that this 8% drop represented a discount. And based on that flawed logic, I decided to average down. I essentially added more capital, doubling my risk exposure on a trade that was already proving me wrong. That was the moment. The moment I turned a small, manageable strategic risk into a massive emotional gamble.
And that decision, adding more capital, it dramatically shifted that recovery hurdle we just talked about.
Yeah.
It made the situation mathematically much worse, even though maybe for a second it felt psychologically better because your average purchase price was now lower.
Well, the market showed no mercy. Almost immediately after I averaged down, it fell another 12%. Just boom. So now I was sitting on a much larger position, size wise, it was deep underwater. I was starting to panic, and my emotional justification shifted again. It wasn't about buying a discount, it was desperation. I convinced myself, okay, now it's truly cheap. It's an absolute bargain down here. Let me buy even more.
Wow. That's often the final stage, isn't it? Complete surrender to the ego's need to be right, or at least to avoid the pain of being wrong. You're not trading based on any real analysis at that point. You're just throwing good money after bad, purely trying to lessen the internal pressure of that huge mounting loss. You're just desperately trying to drag your average price down close enough to the current price so that even a tiny little bounce might save you, might get you back to break even.
The end result was
Well,
catastrophic for that trade. The stock hit the lower circuit breaker. It couldn't physically trade any lower that day, and it stayed locked limit down for 3 straight days. There was zero liquidity. I literally couldn't get out even if I wanted to at that point. When I was finally able to exit the trade after the circuit breakers ended, I booked a 45% loss on the total capital I'd put into that position.
45%. That's just a monumental loss. And driven entirely by that initial refusal to take the small, planned loss, by emotional decision making.
Yeah. It completely wiped out all the profits I'd carefully accumulated over the previous 2 months. That single trade, which started with the fear of booking an 8% loss instead of my planned 5%, just showed me in brutal fashion how destructive that refusal to admit error is. And the lasting pain wasn't even the 45% loss itself, really. It was knowing it took me months of disciplined trading and hard work just to get back to where I was before that one single emotional mistake, just back to zero.
And that story, while painful, it's unfortunately not unique at all. It's the universal experience that really differentiates traders who make it from those who don't. When you talk to professionals, when they look back at their biggest blunders early in their careers, the regret is almost always identical. Man, if I had just honored my initial small stop loss, if I'd just taken that 5% hit, I would have been fine. That regret. It's purely about the emotional failure to hit the exit button when the plan said to.
It really is the difference between realizing, okay, I made an acceptable error, part of the game, and turning that small error into an absolutely unforgivable catastrophe for your account.
Okay, so we've really dug into the psychology, the biases, and we've seen the catastrophic results in the real world, like in your story. Now, we absolutely have to pivot towards solutions. What can people actually do? And crucially, these solutions shouldn't rely just on willpower because we know that fails under pressure. They need to rely on structural and mechanical things, mechanisms that take the high stakes decision making out of that heated emotional moment.
Right, we're trying to build like an anti-fragile framework for dealing with this, moving from just describing the problem to actually designing the fix that protects your capital.
Okay, action step number one. This has to be absolute, non negotiable, completely mechanical, the pre decided stop loss. You absolutely must decide on your exit level, the point where you're wrong before you even click the buy button.
Because that initial decision, that's made when you're calm, right? When you're objective, unbiased,
Mhm.
long before the stress of watching the market tick against you kicks in.
Exactly. It's the principle of pre commitment. You commit to a course of action when you're rational. Then, once that predefined level is hit, whether it's 2%, 5%, whatever your tested strategy dictates, you must execute that stop loss. No questions asked, no negotiation with yourself, no waiting for the next candle or checking the news one more time. This purely mechanical, almost robotic execution. That's what stops that 8% loss from turning into the 45% disaster. You're basically outsourcing the exit decision to your past rational self.
Okay, but hang on. Setting a stop loss is, well, that's the easy part, technically. Every beginner guide tells you to do that. The hard part is actually clicking execute when your hand is shaking, when your ego is screaming at you, don't do it, you're about to confirm you made a mistake? How do we build the mental strength, the discipline required for the execution, not just the initial setup?
Ah, that's a great point. And that leads directly to action step number two. This addresses the root cause of that psychological terror you just described. Reduce your position size. If a trader is genuinely terrified, like stomach in knots terrified, of taking a planned stop loss, it almost always means one thing: they've got too much capital on that single trade.
Ah, okay. So the emotional weight, the fear, it's directly tied to the amount of money at risk,
Yeah.
the financial exposure.
Precisely. If hitting your 5% stop loss on the position translates into a dollar amount loss that's going to financially wound you or maybe psychologically paralyze you for the next week, then you've simply allocated way too much money to that one idea. By deliberately reducing your position size, maybe trading in smaller, more uniform risk units, the actual dollar value of hitting that stop loss becomes much smaller, much more manageable.
Which makes actually executing the exit far less emotionally charged. You're basically reducing the ego's stake in the outcome of that single trade. If a small loss actually feels like just a paper cut, financially and emotionally, then you can treat it like one, just part of the process. But if hitting that stop feels like you're losing an arm, you're never going to pull the trigger willingly.
Right. The goal really should be to find a position size where taking your planned stop loss feels almost boring. It should feel like standard operating procedure, just another step in the plan, not like a five-alarm financial crisis.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Smaller size equals less fear equals better execution. What's the third step?
The third step brings in rigorous accountability. It's about linking that rational planning self we talked about to the emotional self that shows up during the trade. And that's journal your trades. And I don't just mean tracking profits and losses. This needs to be more like a behavioral audit. So, we advise traders to write down three specific things every single time they enter a trade. First, the specific, objective reasons for entering, that's your rational thesis. Second, the intended exit plan, including the exact price level of your stop loss, no ambiguity. And third, this is the crucial part, write down an acknowledgement of how you anticipate feeling if that stop loss gets triggered. And then write down a commitment to execute it anyway, despite that feeling.
Huh. So you document the rational plan and you sort of pre plan for the inevitable emotional reaction. You acknowledge it's coming.
Exactly. By documenting the rational plan before the trade, you create accountability. You have a record of your clear headed thinking. Then, when the market turns against you and the emotions start swirling, you're not arguing with the market, you're arguing with the rational version of yourself from yesterday, the one who set the rules. It helps separate that impulsive emotional self that pops up when things go wrong from the calm planner who decided on the rules of engagement.
It forces you to hold yourself to the standards you set when you were objective and calm. I like that.
Aha. And then beyond these sort of mechanical and accountability steps, we really have to wrap up with the critical mental component here: acceptance. You have to
Yeah.
fundamentally accept the reality that losses are an unavoidable, intrinsic, and actually necessary part of the trading process. A losing trade is not a failure, it's just data, it's feedback from the market.
Right. We have to completely discard this fantasy that successful trading means you never have losses or that you have a 90% win rate. Even the world's absolute best, most disciplined traders, they have losing trades every single week, sometimes every day. They aren't trying to avoid losses altogether.
No, they're focused on managing the size of their losses. That's a fundamentally different goal, and it's the key. The objective isn't to achieve a perfect win rate. The true goal is defined by longevity, survival. The real objective is simply to avoid the behavioral mistakes, like the one we've dissected today, that turn those small, acceptable, strategic losses, your tuition fees, into total account disasters. The kind that prevent you from even being able to trade tomorrow.
Yeah. If you can consistently control the size of your downside on the losing trades, you fundamentally control your ability to stay in the game. You control your longevity, and that gives your strategy, your edge, the time it needs to play out probabilistically over the long run. Hashtag outro.
Well, I think this has been a really vital discussion. We focused on the one single factor that probably kills more trading accounts than anything else out there.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this, chances are you've either made this exact mistake or maybe you're even struggling with it right now. So let's really distill that core survival principle one last time for you, the listener. The phrase that should probably become your mantra in the market: your first loss is your best loss. Book it and move on.
Remember, trading success, real success, it's all about longevity. It's about survival. It's definitely not about trying to win every single trade. That's impossible. You just need to survive long enough for the probabilities for whatever edge your strategy has to actually work out in your favor over time. If you let one emotional failure, one refusal to cut a loss, wipe out months of your hard won capital, you basically reset that probability clock back to zero every single time it happens.
We've really gone through the psychological warfare that happens inside your own head, haven't we? Loss aversion, anchoring bias, the ego protection thing, and we've hopefully given you a practical defense plan. If you can actually implement those three steps we just talked about, the absolute pre-decided stop loss, reducing your position size to minimize the emotional pain, keeping that rigorous trade journal for accountability, I genuinely believe you will save yourself months, maybe even years, of frustration and potentially catastrophic financial hits.
The principle behind it is simple, isn't it? Cut your losses quickly. But the execution, that requires a really deep psychological commitment. Ultimately, mastering the market really starts with mastering yourself, your own emotional reactions.
And maybe just to leave you with a final provocative thought, building on that idea of the long game and ensuring you survive. If discipline, if just sticking to your rules is the only thing truly standing between you and survival in the markets, what's one small behavioral change? What single non negotiable rule about accepting a loss could you implement starting tomorrow that absolutely guarantees you survive to trade another year?
Think about that one carefully because that small commitment, that act of self discipline, that's likely to be the most profitable financial decision you make all week, maybe all month.
Trade safe, stay disciplined, focus on survival.
And thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.